Florida, a state with sunshine, beaches, beautiful nature, friendly people, a few weirdos, and some actually weird laws. Florida has always had a reputation for being fun and relaxing, but also for being a place that is made for the absurd. This is best represented by the many weird laws still on the books today. From keeping a watchful eye on your elephant to not stealing someone else's horse, you can relax in Florida, but you've also got to watch your step. Keep watching as we present the weirdest laws in Florida that can actually get you arrested. Is your elephant properly secured? We all know Florida is a great place for wildlife and for animal lovers. But of course, that comes with the responsibility of looking after the animals. For example, you might come across a ranch with a beautiful horse or two, but don't even think of riding away with one of those horses, cowboy. Stealing a horse in Florida is punishable by hanging. Now, if you prefer to commute to work with your elephant, alligator, or perhaps your favorite goat, make sure you tie them to the parking meter. You've also got to pay for parking. If you go to the Everglades or almost anywhere in Florida, you may come across an alligator. Just make sure you don't feed them, as this is illegal all across the state. It's illegal to fish from a bridge in Florida if you're driving a vehicle. This law appears to prioritize road safety and discourage distractions that might arise from attempting to fish while operating a car. So if you see a big bass while you're on I-95, just let it go. In certain areas of Florida, owning a Burmese python without a proper permit is illegal. This law emerged as an attempt to control the population of invasive and potentially dangerous species in the state. So remember, if you absolutely need a Burmese python, get your permit first. As you can see, Florida takes the welfare of animals very seriously. For example, you can't impersonate an animal. It's also illegal to engage in certain explicit activities with porcupines. We'll let you figure out what that means, but for heaven's sake, make sure you leave the porcupines alone. Careful on the beach. Florida, a state famous for its stunning coastlines and beaches, also has some rather unusual laws related to beach activities. One such odd regulation dictates that it is illegal to sing while wearing a swimsuit in public. This law may have roots in maintaining public decorum, but its enforcement today is rare and raises eyebrows for its quirkiness. This is more of a Sarasota thing though, you know how things go down there. But it's quite common to see beachgoers on South Beach singing and dancing in their swimsuits. And it's not illegal there so far. Additionally, don't even think about throwing a confetti-filled balloon on the beach in Florida, as it's considered an offense. This rule, seemingly targeting beach celebrations, might have been put in place to prevent littering and to maintain the natural beauty of the state's coastal areas. Furthermore, feeding seagulls at the beach is another activity strictly regulated by law. While it's common knowledge that feeding wildlife can disrupt their natural behaviors and habitats, the specific prohibition of feeding seagulls reflects Florida's concern for both the environment and public enjoyment of the beach without interference from the ubiquitous beach-dwelling birds. Can I see your license? You can expect to hear that question if you get pulled over in your car. But what happens if a Florida cop catches you on your skateboard? While you're trying to pull off a kickflip, the cop wants to grind you down with rules and regulations. That's because you need a license to ride a skateboard in Florida. Make sure you get yours, and don't forget your helmet either. In fact, it might be easier to ride a bike instead. Just make sure you don't lean your bike against a tree. That's a big no-no. Behave decently. Of course, many states have laws to protect public decency, and as wild as things can get in Florida, you've still got to conduct yourself with a bit of decorum. For example, committing adultery is still on the books in Florida, and while this isn't unique to the state, adultery is still technically illegal in Florida. However, this law is rarely enforced and is seen as archaic and irrelevant in contemporary society. Just be careful if you're married, you never know. Another example of the decency expected in Florida is to inform the police after you've robbed a bank. If you plan to rob a bank in Florida, you are legally required to inform the bank at least 24 hours in advance. It's also not decent to sell your children in Florida. While that obviously makes sense and is a very serious crime all over the world, there was a time in the US when people had to sell their children to make ends meet. During the Great Depression, there were sad incidents of mothers selling their children. Perhaps that's why this law was put into place. It was maybe odd for the time, but but we're glad it's still on the books. Ladies, if you're going to visit a hairstylist while you're in Florida, there are certain ways to behave. Don't even think about falling asleep under the hairdryer, as that is completely illegal. If you're in the Tampa Bay area, don't eat cottage cheese after 6 p.m. Any other type of cheese is apparently okay. While you might want to dry your clothes on a clothesline to save on the electricity, there was a relatively recent law in Cape Coral that forbids this. That's right, you can't dry your clothes on a clothesline. If you rent a car in Florida, remember that you can't park it in an intersection. Now, this makes total sense, but it's weird that such a law had to be put into place. Must have been some Florida man who wanted to leave his car in the middle of a busy junction. Also, if you need to quickly get from one side of the street to the other, make sure you don't barrel down the street. That means don't climb into a barrel and roll down. When you're in Florida, you might see a few people selling oranges on public roadways. This might not always be enforced, but it is technically illegal. If you're a man, don't wear a strapless gown in public. Trust us on this one, you might get arrested. If you're an unmarried woman, you may not parachute on a Sunday. Leave the parachuting on a Sunday to the men. You have the other 6 days to go parachuting without possibly facing a fine or jail time. It's also illegal to break wind in any public place anywhere in the state after 6 p.m. There's even a weird law that says you can't shower naked. Yep, you heard that right. Make sure you bring your suit and tie along, I guess. Obviously, such a law won't be enforced, but perhaps you shouldn't announce to the world that you showered naked in Florida just to be safe. Since Florida wants a decent society, gossiping is also not permitted. One wonders how such an absurd law came into place, as it violates the First Amendment. But hey, perhaps some Floridians just got fed up of rumors spreading like wildfire. In 1868, a law was passed that forbade couples from living together if they weren't married. While maybe not enforced today, at least that's what we assume, it was a product of a more conservative time. Once again, just be careful. There was also a ridiculous sport called dwarf tossing, once played in Florida, and it's as horrible as it sounds. It is now thankfully illegal, but how weird that such a game was played and that laws had to be passed to punish people against playing it. Of course, not all of these weird laws, in fact probably most of them, are not enforced, but they are still on the books, so you never know. Enjoy your time in Florida. Just exercise the usual precautions you would when you're taking any exotic trip to a strange land. Now it's time to hear from you. Do you think these crazy laws add to the charm that is Florida, or do they actually turn off potential visitors to the Sunshine State? Should they repeal them all, or is it just fun that they're still in the books? Let us know in the comments section below.